This is toxic, Emily's words sliced through the air, cold and sharp. Karen's hand trembled as she poured soup, the hot liquid splashing onto the tablecloth. The sting of her daughter's cruel words echoed louder than the dinner conversation around them. But Karen didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She had spent her life building a future for Emily, sacrificing for her, loving her through every phase. But this was different. I'm curious, where in the world are you joining us from? Drop your city or country in the comments and make sure you're subscribed for all the latest updates. This is toxic, Emily sneered, her voice cutting deeper than any knife. The spoon trembled midair, the ladle of butternut squash soup sliding too quickly into the ceramic bowl and splashing onto the linen tablecloth. Karen blinked at the stain as if it might explain what had just been said. Her grip tightened around the handle, the copper burn of shame crawling up her neck. At the far end of the table, Emily sat cross-legged in her chair, fork poised delicately in hand, face unreadable, except for the eyes, sharp, calculated. No one spoke. John cleared his throat, reached for the salt. Olivia busied herself with her napkin. Karen's sister Marian gave a small sympathetic smile, then dropped her gaze. The air shifted, thick with discomfort and a sour undertone of unspoken truth. Karen forced her hands to still and set the ladle down gently, deliberately. She moved to the sink, her back to the room, heart hammering. She could feel Emily's smirk without turning around. It wasn't the words alone, it was how she said them, like she'd been waiting, like she wanted to hurt her. Karen had spent years dancing around Emily's barbed comments, dismissing them with a laugh or brushing them off with politeness. Teenagers, she'd tell herself, hormones, growing pains. But Emily was 18 now, not a child, old enough to know cruelty when she wielded it. Toxic, the word echoed. Was it the meal, the house, Karen herself? Her eyes landed on the drawer near the coffee pot. Third one down. She didn't need to open it. She knew what was inside. Statements, charts, letters, 16 years of contributions. The college fund, Emily's college fund. She gripped the counter's edge. Karen had skipped vacations, worn shoes longer than she should have, cut back on groceries, canceled spa appointments, and nodded patiently through every snide comment about being too uptight, too traditional, just a mom. She did it all for Emily's future, because that's what mothers do. But tonight felt different. Karen turned slowly, her face a carefully composed mask. She offered another helping of salad to no one in particular. Emily declined with a wave, glancing at her phone beneath the table, disengaged. Disrespect. It had become Emily's currency, and Karen had been paying the price too long. Dinner continued in clipped exchanges and forced laughter. The conversation danced around weather, work and Olivia's new internship, safe ground. But Karen barely registered it. She watched Emily, noted every dismissive shrug, every derisive glance, and beneath it all, something in Karen cracked. Quietly, irrevocably. When the last plate was scraped clean and the dishwasher hummed to life, Karen excused herself and stepped into the hallway. The house muffled behind her. She pulled her phone from her cardigan pocket and stared at the screen. The contact was already saved. Mark Halpern, financial advisor. She opened the thread. Her thumb hovered. Her breath came slower now, heavier, but not from fear, from clarity. Her daughter didn't need another dinner. She needed a lesson. Karen typed 3 words and hit send before she could second-guess herself. Freeze Emily's fund. Then she tucked the phone away and walked calmly back to the kitchen, shoulders square, spine tall. Karen poured herself a glass of wine, watching Emily laugh in the next room, unaware that her world had just shifted. The smell of turkey fills the air, but Karen's mind is already far from the dinner table. The scent of rosemary and roasted garlic drifted through the kitchen, clinging to the walls like a memory. Laughter trickled in from the dining room, muted, distant, Karen moved mechanically, sliding the casserole back into the oven, wiping a non-exit smear from the countertop, adjusting the candles by the sink. Her hands worked with the elegance of routine, but her thoughts had already slipped out the door. She couldn't stop replaying it. This is toxic. The way Emily said it. Careless. Precise. And the silence that followed. No one came to her defense. Not even John. Just glances exchanged like uncomfortable currency. Everyone pretending not to notice that something had snapped. Karen didn't feel wounded anymore. She felt focused. She had once believed confrontation was the answer, that if she just sat Emily down, explained how deeply those words cut, things would shift, that maybe her daughter would blink, surprised, and remember the woman who had packed every school lunch, who stayed up to finish every forgotten project, who had loved her unconditionally through every storm. But love hadn't earned her respect, and now something colder was taking root, something clearer. She walked into the hallway and paused by the drawer. Third from the top. She opened it slowly, running her fingers along the stack of neatly ordered papers. The college fund, carefully managed, quietly nurtured. It had always been Emily's, until now. Karen hadn't really touched it. Not in any significant way. She'd treated it like sacred ground, as if withdrawing a single cent would make her less of a mother. But standing there in the hush of the hallway, with dinner plates clinking softly in the next room, she saw the truth for what it was. That money wasn't a promise. It was leverage. And maybe, just maybe, it was time Emily felt the difference. Back in the kitchen, Karen poured herself a glass of wine. She sipped it slowly, gaze fixed on the flicker of the stove light. Her phone buzzed once. Mark. She opened the message. Freeze complete. Emily will notice immediately if she logs in. Karen stared at the words. No tremble in her hand this time. No regret. Just a strange, weightless clarity. Her silence hadn't protected anyone. It had enabled Emily's disdain. That ended tonight. She took another sip. As she rinsed the salad bowl, she imagined the next dinner. Same table. Same chairs. Same smug expression across the table. But this time, something would be different. There would be a question behind Emily's eyes. A seed of doubt. Karen had always served quietly. She knew every preference, every allergy, every food phase. But she'd never allowed herself to taste the power she held. Not until now. She placed the last dish in the drying rack, and ran a towel over her hands. Somewhere in the living room, Marian laughed too loudly at something. Karen didn't flinch. She was already planning next week's meal. Roast chicken, truffle risotto, a red wine reduction Emily once pretended to hate, but always finished. It would be a perfect meal, thoughtful, elegant, served by the same woman who had learned to make herself small, so others could feel full. Not anymore. Karen moved with a grace that came not from submission, but certainty. In her bedroom later that night, she sat at her writing desk. A candle burned low beside her. She scribbled a grocery list with unusual care. Then she paused, flipped to the next page, and began a second list. Names of schools, advisors, banks. Questions she'd avoided for years. It wasn't just about punishment. It was about permission. Her own. She didn't know exactly what came next, but she knew this. It would not look like before. She would make the next move with her eyes open, her spine straight, and her silence weaponized into something far more powerful. As Karen closed the notebook, the corner of her mouth lifted, not in malice, but resolve. The game had changed, and Emily didn't even know she was playing. Moments later, Mark's face drained when he checked the college fund statement. It was just after breakfast when it happened. Karen stood at the sink, rinsing a pan, her sleeves rolled up, forearms flecked with egg yolk and soap bubble. The air still carried the scent of maple syrup and scorched toast. Emily was scrolling idly through her phone, at the kitchen island, earbuds in, half smiling at something on her screen. Mark leaned against the fridge, tapping in his PIN, checking his balances, like he always did before heading out. Then stillness. A pause that didn't belong. Karen turned, instinct bristling. Mark's face was frozen. He stared down at his phone as if it had personally betrayed him, his jaw slackened, his thumb hovering mid-scroll. "What is this?" he said. Emily popped one earbud out. Mark looked up, his voice harder now. What the hell is this, Mom? The fund. It's frozen. Karen dried her hands on the dish towel. She didn't speak immediately. The words she had practiced the night before curled up and vanished under his stare. You froze? He asked louder this time. Without telling me. Emily looked up then, the shift in her expression so fast it startled Karen. A flicker of panic. A twitch of guilt. She tucked her phone under her leg and went still. I did, Karen said, steady but quiet. Last night. Mark let out a dry, incredulous laugh. Are you serious? You didn't even talk to me about it. I need that money. Applications, housing deposits, tuition holds. It's not just some number on a screen. Karen nodded once. I know what it is. Then why? His voice cracked. Why now? Emily stood but didn't speak. Her eyes darted between them, unreadable. Karen could feel the tension in the air thickening like smoke. Her own pulse was slow but heavy, each beat a reminder that she'd stepped into territory that had no You heard what she said to me, Karen said, finally meeting Mark's eyes. You were there. Mark shook his head. That's not a reason to sabotage her education. She called me toxic. Karen snapped, the calm slipping for a second. At my table. In my home. And no one said a word. Emily flinched, then looked away. Mark's voice softened slightly. She's a teenager. She's 18. Karen shot back. Old enough to know what respect is. Old enough to weaponize her words and expect no consequence. Emily finally spoke. I didn't mean it like that. Karen turned to her. Then how did you mean it? Emily hesitated. I don't know. I was upset. It was just something I said. Exactly. Karen whispered. You said it like it meant nothing. Silence fell again, the kind that made clocks seem too loud and the refrigerator hum unbearable. Mark threw his hands up. So now what? She grovels and you maybe unlock her future? Is that it? Karen's chest tightened. The words stung, not because they were true, but because she had feared them. She opened her mouth, then closed it. She hadn't thought of it as control. Not really. It was about boundaries. About being seen. But in this moment, all of that blurred. I'm not destroying anyone's future, she said quietly. But I won't fund contempt. Mark stared at her for a long beat, then grabbed his jacket off the hook. This is messed up, he muttered, then slammed the door on his way out. Emily stood frozen, arms crossed, jaw clenched. So what now? Karen didn't answer. She walked into the hallway, picked up her phone and dialed. Janet, she said when the line connected. Can we talk about the legal side of a frozen college fund? Her attorney was calm, but to the point. If it's been set up in your name and you're the sole trustee, Janet said, you're within your rights. But Karen, be careful. If Emily challenges it, it could get complicated. Karen looked toward the dining room, where Emily now sat alone, her face unreadable. Karen stared at the ceiling as her lawyer's final words echoed. Emily may contest this. Why would you do this? You're ruining my future. Mark's voice shakes with panic as he confronts Karen. The garage door groaned. Karen stood in the kitchen, her hands still wrapped around the cooling ceramic of her coffee mug. The sunlight through the window struck her face at a sharp angle, illuminating the worry that had begun carving itself into the corners of her eyes. The front door slammed open. Mark's footsteps pounded down the hall fast, loud, shaking the hardwood beneath them. He burst in, still in his jacket, cheeks flushed with cold and fury. I checked again, he snapped. It's still frozen. You really did it. Karen set her mug down with a soft clink. I told you I did. His hands went to his head, dragging through his curls. Why would you do this? You're ruining my future. There it was. Panic, plain and undiluted. This was never meant to be about you, she said. It was. Yeah? Mark cut in. Because it feels like it's about all of us now. Karen hesitated. Emily had drifted into the room silently. She hovered in the doorway, arms crossed, watching but saying nothing. I've been trying to stay out of this war between you two for years. Mark said. His voice cracked. And now it's like I stepped on a landmine I didn't even see. Karen blinked. War, he laughed bitterly. You think I don't notice? The backhanded comments, the tension, the fake smiles at dinner. You two haven't liked each other in years, and I've been stuck in the middle, forced to play mediator, referee, peacekeeper, and now you've dragged my future into it. Her throat tightened. She hadn't seen it like that. You didn't mean to hurt me, he said. Softer now, but you did. Across the room, Emily shifted, her arms tightening across her chest. She didn't look at Mark. She didn't look at anyone, just stared at the corner of the kitchen island, like it might rescue her from the moment. Karen turned to her. You could say something. Emily flinched. What do you want me to say? Anything. Silence. The silence hurt more than any insult ever could. Mark looked between them, shaking his head. You both just want to win. That's not true. Karen said. Then what is this? He asked, holding up his phone like it might burst into flames. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like a power play, and I'm just the collateral damage. Karen stepped back. The room felt smaller, like the walls had shifted in closer when she wasn't looking. I've always tried to protect you, she said. Mark's eyes softened for a moment. And maybe that's the problem. He turned to Emily. You could at least say you're sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen. Emily murmured, her voice low, evasive. That's not the same thing, Mark said, voice flat. Karen's hands trembled at her sides. The guilt slithered in, cool and quick, winding up her spine. Had she really been so focused on proving a point that she missed the cracks in her son's foundation? I just wanted her to understand, Karen whispered. She doesn't, Mark said, and maybe she never will, but this isn't the way. He walked toward the door. No coat this time, just fury and exhaustion in his stride. Mark, Karen called. He paused, hand on the doorknob. I'll figure out school. I always do, but don't ask me to stay in the middle of this anymore. And then he left. The door slammed again, louder than before. A silence settled, a heavy one, different than before. It didn't hum with victory, it ached with fallout. Karen stood motionless. Emily walked past her, brushing her shoulder lightly, not in comfort, just passing through. Karen sat slowly at the kitchen table, staring at the grain in the wood. She pulled her phone toward her, her thumb hovered. The contact Janet. League. Karen opened a new message, and typed slowly. If she fights me, how far can this go? Now they're calling me heartless on social media. The first message hit her phone at 6:42 a.m. Are you really freezing your daughter's college fund over a dinner comment? Karen stared at the screen, bleary-eyed, her morning coffee untouched. Then came the second, and the third. Screenshots, TikToks, posts, a cousin she hadn't heard from in years, tagging her in a thread titled, When Parents Weaponize Wealth. She scrolled without breathing. Some comments were supportive. Finally, a mom with a backbone. Others, not so kind. This is emotional abuse. Petty, toxic, control disguised as empowerment. No wonder her daughter hates her. She dropped the phone onto the kitchen table like it had burned her. The kettle screamed from the stove. She didn't move to turn it off. The story had spread faster than she imagined. Someone, maybe Emily, maybe Mark, had talked. Now her decision wasn't just a family crisis. It was public theater. She was trending. And not for her peach cobbler. She finally poured the tea, hands shaking, and sat down to read more. The division was sharp. Women praised her strength. We're done funding disrespect. But younger voices dragged her through the mud. Karen is a textbook narcissist. The irony of her name wasn't lost on anyone. Then came the email. Subject, interview request. Good morning, America. She closed the laptop. The weight of it all settled around her shoulders like a wet coat. This wasn't about a frozen account anymore. This was about legacy, about how she'd be remembered, not just by strangers, but by her children. Footsteps approached. Her eldest daughter Sasha stepped into the kitchen, hair still damp from the shower, brow furrowed. You've seen it, she asked gently. Karen nodded. Sasha pulled out a chair. You need to say something, publicly, before someone else does it for you. I don't even know what I'd say. Well, figure it out, Sasha said. Because right now, they're filling in the blanks for you. Karen didn't argue. She just reached for a pen and a pad, the kind she always used when the truth got too loud for screens. She started scribbling. This wasn't about punishment. It was about pause. Respect has to mean something. She scratched the line out. Tried again. A family is not a transaction. I didn't withhold love. I withheld funding. There's a difference. Another scratch. Another false start. The words refused to cooperate. They twisted in her throat. Inky and uncertain. By midday her statement was a war zone of crossed-out sentences and unfinished thought. Every time she thought she had clarity, a new thread, a new voice, a new wave of shame, knocked her down again. She wasn't just fighting Emily anymore. She was fighting versions of herself she didn't even recognize. She closed her eyes and breathed in through her nose, out through her mouth. Again, she had survived worse. The doorbell rang. Karen opened it to find a small box sitting on the welcome mat. No postage, no note, just her name in familiar handwriting. She carried it inside, sliced the tape with a butter knife. Inside was an old envelope, yellowed, frayed, tied with twine. A voice crackled from the phone in her hand. Speaker already activated. I found your original will, said Helen, her longtime friend and former attorney. I thought you'd want to see what you wrote before all this began. Karen held the document in her lap. Her eyes scanned the first lines, her own words written years ago when the world was quieter, simpler. To my children, I give not just what I have, but what I've learned. May they use both with grace. She sat very still. Grace. That word hadn't been in the air for days. Not since the war began. Karen stared at the will, heart pounding. Maybe the real battle wasn't with Emily, or even the public. Maybe it was with the woman she used to be. Holding the will in my hands shook me to the core. The paper felt fragile in her hands, like time had thinned it, made it delicate. Karen read the words again, slower this time, her mother's handwriting curling across the page in fountain pen loops. To my children, I give not just what I have, but what I've learned. May they use both, with grace. She hadn't thought about her mother in weeks. Not since the dinner, not since everything tipped sideways. Her voice, her laugh, even her smell had all been buried beneath the noise of this battle. First with Emily, then with the world. But now she was everywhere. Helen's voice crackled again over the phone speaker. You remember what she used to say, don't you? Money isn't a leash, it's a ladder. She put it in the will on purpose. The fund was her idea. You followed through. Karen's throat tightened. She wanted each generation to rise a little higher, not to be controlled, to be equipped. Karen pressed her palm against the yellowed page like it might calm her racing heart. She'd hate what I've done with it, she whispered. No, Helen said gently. She'd hate why you did it. You're not wrong to want respect, Karen, but this was about pain. Yours. Karen said nothing. She couldn't. It was like someone had opened a window she didn't know existed. And now the cold, honest air was pouring in. She thought about the night Emily was born. How small she had been, fists curled tight like she was already fighting the world. How Karen had promised she'd never let that girl feel powerless. Not ever. But somewhere along the way, Karen had become the one wielding power, and it didn't feel like protection anymore. She stood slowly, pacing the room. The headlines still screamed from her laptop screen, the pad of torn-up statements still lying next to the kettle, but all of it felt distant now, like it belonged to a different woman, a version of herself she'd outgrown. She sank onto the edge of the couch, will still clutched in her hand, and let the silence hold her. Maybe she'd been trying to reclaim something, dignity, control, a voice she'd muted for too long, and maybe freezing the fund had felt like justice. But it wasn't legacy. Legacy was bigger than discipline, bigger than ego. It was generosity rooted in wisdom. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, she found herself whispering to the ceiling. I just wanted her to understand me. But understanding couldn't be forced. Not through silence. Not through control, and certainly not through a ledger. She looked at the will again. May they use both, with grace. Karen swallowed hard. She wanted to be that woman, the one who gave with grace, who led without, who honored her own pain, but didn't pass it down like an heirloom. The floor creaked behind her. She turned. Emily stood in the hallway, not defiant, not snide, just quiet. Her hair was damp, her posture uncertain. No phone, no eye roll, just the weight of something unsaid between them. Karen didn't speak. Neither did Emily. But there was something in her daughter's eyes, a flicker of vulnerability, maybe even remorse. Karen folded the will gently, placed it on the coffee table, and met her gaze. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet, but it was something. Emily stepped into the room, and for the first time in weeks, Karen didn't brace for a fight. She waited for the truth. He stood in front of me, eyes full of emotion, but no longer with anger. Karen sat still, the folded will on the coffee table like a sacred weight. She didn't know how long she and Emily had stared at each other, seconds, minutes. Neither spoke, but something had shifted. The edges between them, once jagged, now just blurred. Then came the knock. Not loud, not urgent, but familiar. Emily glanced toward the door and then back at Karen. There was no tension in her face, only a strange stillness. Karen stood and opened it. Mark stood on the porch, shoulders hunched, backpack slung low, eyes bloodshot but soft. "Can I come in?" he asked. Karen stepped aside. He didn't rush to speak. He took off his shoes, walked into the living room, and sat at the edge of the armchair across from her. Emily lingered near the hallway, uncertain. Mark looked at Karen, then Emily, then back again. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "I've been thinking," he said, "a lot about everything, about what I said, what I didn't say." Karen nodded, waiting. "I was angry," he continued, "and scared, not just about the fund, about being in the middle, about choosing wrong." His voice trembled slightly. "You didn't deserve all that." I knew what Emily said was wrong, and I still stood there. "I didn't stand up for you." Karen blinked. "You're not the only one who didn't." Mark looked at his hands. "But I'm the one who should've. You've always been there for us, even when we didn't deserve." He paused, then glanced at Emily. "And I let it become normal to talk about you like you weren't even there. That wasn't fair." Karen's breath caught. He looked like the boy she'd rocked to sleep 1,000 nights ago, even if his shoulders now reached hers. "I'm sorry," he said, "for lashing out, for making you feel like you were the villain." Emily stepped forward then, arms still crossed but voice quiet. "I was wrong," she said. "I shouldn't have said what I did. Not like that. Not in front of everyone. I was frustrated, but I went too far." Karen watched her closely. "I don't know how to undo it," Emily added, "but I didn't mean to hurt you. Not really." Karen swallowed. It wasn't a full apology, not yet, but it was something, a beginning. "I'm not asking for perfection," she said slowly. "I'm asking for respect. That's all I've ever wanted." Mark nodded. Emily's eyes dropped. "I've made mistakes too," Karen admitted. "I reacted out of pain, maybe out of pride, and I'm sorry if I hurt you both trying to make a point." Silence folded between them, but it didn't sting this time. It held them, tentatively like a thread stitching the first seam back together. "I forgive you," Karen said finally, looking at Mark, then at Emily. "But going forward, respect is the only currency I deal in." They both nodded, quiet, muted. The air shifted, still heavy, but less bitter. Karen reached for the folded will again, holding it in her lap like a reminder. "We're not fixed," she said softly, "but we're talking. That's something." Mark smiled weakly. "I'll take something." His phone buzzed. He glanced down. His eyes widened. "Oh," Karen leaned forward. "What is it?" Mark looked up, blinking. "It's from the admissions portal." Mark held up the screen, his voice cracking as he whispered. "I got it. Her scholarship covers everything, but it comes with a catch." The acceptance letter had barely cooled on the printer when Emily stormed into the room, her face flushed with disbelief. "I got the scholarship," she said breathlessly. Karen stood from the couch, startled, still clutching the folded will from earlier. "Emily, that's incredible. But there's a catch." Karen blinked. "What kind of catch?" Emily thrust the letter at her. a sharp finger tapping the fine print. 100 hours of community service. By the end of the semester, or I lose it. Karen read the clause twice. That's not unreasonable. It's manipulative. Emily snapped. They're making me earn what I already deserve. Karen's gaze softened. Maybe they're asking you to give something back. That's not the worst thing. Emily folded her arms. I don't have time to waste folding napkins or walking someone's cat. Actually, Karen said, hesitating, I have a contact at the senior center downtown. They're always looking for volunteers. Emily groaned. Of course you do. Karen steadied her tone. You want help or not? A long pause stretched between them, before Emily muttered. Fine. But don't think this changes anything. I don't, Karen. But maybe it starts something. The senior center smelled of lilac and library books. Karen held the door open as Emily trudged inside in oversized sweats and thinly veiled contempt. A clipboard greeted them, then a flurry of names and instructions. Emily was assigned to assist in the rec room. Karen, much to her surprise, was invited to co-lead an art therapy group. They didn't speak much the first day. Emily handed out bingo cards, with a sullen. Karen helped an older woman named Rosa layer watercolors over a half-finished portrait of her late husband. But as the days passed, something shifted. On Tuesday, Emily laughed when Mr. DeWitt told a joke about retirement being just an excuse to nap publicly. On Wednesday, she helped fix a speaker so they could dance to Sinatra. By Friday, she was asking Karen for paintbrushes, not eyeing her like a stranger across a minefield. One afternoon, Emily sat beside Karen at the art table, carefully outlining the petals of a daisy. Rosa said her daughter stopped visiting when she got promoted, she said, voice quiet. Karen didn't look up. People forget what matters when they're trying to prove something. Emily nodded slowly. It's weird. I thought this would be off. It's hard to hate a room full of people who just want to tell you their story, Karen said. Emily glanced at her. I didn't think you'd volunteer here. You're always so private. Karen set down her brush. I used to think vulnerability was weakness, but I've learned it's how we grow. Emily said nothing. A beat passed. Then she whispered, I wasn't trying to ruin anything. I know, Karen said. And I wasn't trying to control you. I was trying to be seen. Emily nodded. The moment didn't need more than that. The following week, the director of the center approached Karen with a clipboard and a hesitant smile. Would you consider speaking at our community night next month? She asked. Your story, your strength, it resonates. Karen blinked. Me? People need to hear what you've lived through, the choices you've made. It could help someone. Karen looked down at her hands, stained with paint, and something softer. Peace. Maybe. She hadn't told her story to anyone outside her family. Not really. Not like that. Emily overheard. She stepped closer, a rare light in her eyes. You should do it, she said. You always told us to own our truth. Karen studied her daughter's shoulders, relaxed, face open. Maybe she had been wrong about what healing looked like. Maybe it didn't arrive with declarations or grand apologies. Maybe it came with daisy petals and Sinatra records. Karen took the clipboard, stared at the blank sign-up sheet, and whispered, I think I'm ready. They want me to speak in front of the whole Karen stood in the kitchen, holding the invitation like it might disappear if she blinked too hard. The paper was soft, folded neatly down the middle, printed in calm serif fonts that didn't match the thunder building in her chest. Community night. Guest speaker Karen Holloway. She set it on the counter and stared at it like it might explain itself. Emily walked in just as Karen reached for her tea. You got it? She asked casually, though her eyes flicked to the paper immediately. Karen nodded, unsure whether to smile or run. They want me to speak, she said, her voice half a breath. In front of the whole town. Emily leaned against the doorframe. That's good, right? I'm not sure yet. There was a long pause. Want help? Emily asked. Karen blinked at her. With the speech? Emily shrugged. You helped me get through bingo cards and daisy drawings. It's only fair. Karen didn't say yes out loud, but she slid a notebook across the table anyway. They worked at the dining room table, side by side. Karen jotted down fragments while Emily they argued over adjectives. circled phrases like hard-won clarity and earned softness. For the first time in months, the air between them didn't bristle. It moved, flowed. Something about the shared task, the act of building, not breaking, stitched a quiet understanding between them. "I don't want to sound bitter," Karen said one evening. "You don't," Emily replied. "You sound real." Karen smiled faintly. "That might be worse." But Emily shook her head. "That might be what people need to hear." The night arrived too soon. The community center buzzed with folding chairs and iced lemonade. Karen stood backstage, smoothing the hem of her blouse for the 5th time. Her hands were cold, her mouth dry. Emily peeked through the curtain. "It's full." Karen turned. "Great." "Hey," Emily said, reaching for her hand. "You've already done the hardest part." Karen arched an eyebrow. "You survived me," Emily added with a grin. Karen let out a soft laugh, grateful and terrified. When her name was called, she walked slowly to the mic. Every step echoed. She took a breath, then looked up. The lights were warm, the room quiet. "My name is Karen Holloway," she began, voice steady but low. "I'm a mother, a grandmother, a daughter, and for most of my life, I thought silence was strength." She looked to the front row, where Emily sat, hands clasped, eyes fixed. "But silence," Karen said, "can also be fear. And I lived with a lot of that. Fear of not being enough, of being dismissed, of giving everything and still being invisible." She paused. A ripple moved through the crowd. "This past year, my family and I went through something hard, painful, public." She smiled faintly. "Maybe you read about it." A few chuckles, a few stiff nods. "I made choices I'm not proud of, others I'd make again. But through it all, I learned that dignity, real dignity, isn't about winning. It's about being honest, owning your story, and choosing respect even when it's not returned." The room was still. "I didn't come here to lecture," she said. "I came here to listen, and to remind you that it's never too late to rewrite the way your story ends." A slow, growing wave of applause filled the room. Karen stepped back, exhaling for the first time all night. In the front row, Emily was crying quiet. Later, as the crowd dispersed, a man in a tailored blazer approached her. "Mrs. Holloway," he said, "I work with the Mayor's Outreach Council. We're developing a town-wide elder dignity initiative, and your voice, your experience, it could anchor it." Karen blinked. "Anchor it. We'd like you to lead it." Karen looked out at the now empty room and said, almost to herself, "Maybe it's time I stop surviving, and start leading." This was bigger than. The evening sun slanted through the windows of the living room, as Karen and Emily sat side by side, surrounded by notebooks, flyers and sticky notes cascading across the coffee table. Each paper carried fragments of a dream, sketches of logos, mission statements, lists of possible community partners and grant deadlines. "We need something that bridges generations," Emily said, tapping her pen against her notebook. "Not just a senior program, but a real dialogue, like teen-led workshops, where young people listen to older adults and vice versa." Karen smiled at the idea. "Soft, hopeful, forward-moving, and maybe oral histories. We record stories, share them, preserve wisdom." Emily's eyes lit up. "Yes, and springboard into art projects, community murals, intergenerational theater." The air crackled with possibility. This was no longer about frozen funds or old arguments. It was about purpose, and the fact that they were building it together felt infinitely more powerful. Over the following weeks, the plan took shape. Karen took the lead on structure and mission. Elder Respect Initiative. Emily dove into logistics, website layout, fundraising pages, social media accounts. They divvied tasks with a tacit understanding. Karen offered experience and heart. Emily delivered energy and technical skill. They met one Saturday at the senior center again, this time not as service volunteers, but as collaborators. Karen introduced the idea to the director. Emily handed out surveys to seniors and teens, asking what they wanted to learn from each other. The room hummed with questions. "Tell me about your first job. What was school like when you were young?" And answers that were honest, unexpected, healing. Late at night, they'd reconvene at home. Emily would insist on coffee. Karen would stand at the whiteboard, rewriting mission statements, until they sounded just right. Sometimes they'd argue over words, which phrasing felt authentic. Karen's ideas were grounded, Emily's hope. Together they made a balanced blueprint. This isn't just a movement, Karen said one night, voice steady. It's what we needed. Emily nodded, her expression soft. It's what I needed. Word spread quickly. Flyers went up around town. A small article in the local paper, Mother-Daughter Team Launches Elder Respect Initiative, caught the mayor's attention. Soon inquiries began rolling in, about sponsorship, meeting spaces, volunteer sign-up. Karen felt a familiar tightness in her chest, equal parts pride and fear. The stakes had shifted. This was no longer private. Decisions about funding, partnerships, press appearances pressed in on her. She closed her eyes. How far would she go? Emily watched her and placed a hand on her arm. You've got this. Karen opened her eyes and took a breath. She did. They did, for each other and for the movement. Their first pilot workshop arrived. A half-day event pairing middle schoolers and seniors in storytelling and collage making. The community center buzzed with laughter. Shuffling chairs, crayons dropping onto tabletops. Karen guided the room. Emily checked off volunteers, passed out coffee cookies, took mental notes. At the end, a grandmother named Joyce hugged Emily and whispered, "Your mom gave me back my voice." Emily blinked, overcome. Karen caught her daughter's eye. No words, just pride. Back in the living room, that night, the coffee table was cleared only of crumbs. In its place lay a pile of thank you notes. From seniors, from teens, from the mayor's office. One envelope was embossed with press pack. They looked at each other. Emily swallowed. We did this. Karen leaned back. And we'll keep doing it. But as the press inquiries began stacking up, she felt the familiar hum of pressure. She glanced at the letters: an invitation from a regional news station, a request from a community foundation. A staff member from the senior center called to ask if the initiative could present at the next town hall. She studied the papers. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was responsibility, reputation, real impact. Emily said softly, "Whatever comes next, we face it together." Karen closed her eyes and nodded. She reached for the press pack, then thought of the town hall crowd's faces, the senior center's welcoming arms, her daughter's steady presence. Yes, together. As the landline rang with another press request, Karen lifted the receiver and said, voice steady, "This is Karen Holloway. How can I help? National outlets want to know about my story now." Karen stared at the email subject line on her laptop screen. Feature request, New York Times, National Human Interest section. She blinked, half wondering if it was a prank. It wasn't. Her inbox was full of similar messages. CNN, NPR, even a podcast that covered modern family dynamics had reached out. They all wanted to hear the same thing: how a single act of rebellion became a nationwide movement on dignity and intergenerational healing. The story had spread like dry grass under a first local blogs, then regional features, now national attention. Karen Holloway had become an accidental figurehead, and she wasn't sure she was ready. She closed the laptop slowly and walked to the window. Outside, two teens were handing out flyers with the Elder Respect Initiative logo printed in bold. Down the street, she could see the mural Emily helped paint with the seniors. Twisted vines and open hands bridging across generations. Karen pressed her hand against the glass. "This is real," she murmured. That afternoon, she and Emily met with their board advisor at the senior center. "They want you to do a speaking tour," he said. 3 cities, paid, all expenses covered, panel spots at 2 universities. Karen sat back. A tour? Her voice was even, but inside her chest, something clenched. Emily leaned in. "You'd be amazing." Karen raised an eyebrow. "You think I want to spend weeks in airports giving TED Talks to strangers?" Emily smiled. "Not want, but maybe need." Karen chuckled, but the idea stuck. She'd spent decades shrinking, living in the background of her own story. Now the world wanted her in the front row. Later that night, she walked out to the porch and called Helen. "They want me to speak. All over. I should feel excited, but all I feel is pressure." Helen listened quietly, then said, "It's not about excitement, Karen. It's about alignment. Is this still your message?" That stuck with her. The next morning she reviewed their mission statement line by line. Every word had to stay true. Karen sent a list of boundaries to her advisor. No partnerships with for-profit retirement homes. No corporate co-branding. No reshaping the story for marketing value. If her voice was being broadcast, it would be authentic or not at all. By the end of the week, her face appeared in 3 articles. One called her a champion of family truth-telling. Another called her a complicated hero. One harsh op-ed labeled her the grandmother who froze her family to defrost a movement. Karen read that one twice. She didn't even flinch, because now she understood what she stood for. The noise grew, comments poured in, supporters donated in droves, volunteers doubled, schools requested programming. Karen felt pulled in every direction, but somehow grounded. Emily watched it all unfold, equal parts fascinated and protective. "You okay?" she asked one evening, watching her mother finish a phone interview. Karen exhaled. "I am, but I don't want us to lose what made this matter in the first place." "We won't," Emily said. "We're steering this, remember?" Then came the letter. A glossy envelope from a major national sponsor. Karen opened it slowly at the kitchen table. "We'd like to fully fund the Elder Respect Initiative. 6 figures. Multi-year commitment." Karen's hands trembled. She turned the page. "We request naming rights and final editorial review of all media." The words hit like ice. She folded the letter, sat back, and stared out the window where the mural caught the last of the sunlight. This wasn't just success. It was a test. Karen set the letter down and whispered to Emily, "What's the cost of saying yes? They want control, but I won't sacrifice my values." Karen unfolded the letter again, spread across the kitchen table like a challenge. The offer was real. Complete funding, but with naming rights. Editorial control. Quiet clauses, giving the sponsor final say over branding, messaging, even board appointments. She closed her eyes. The money would secure everything. Expansion, paid staff, community centers, programming in schools. It would transform the Elder Respect Initiative into a visible force. But honesty and dignity, those were the cornerstones. Not logos and disclaimers. Emily hovered in the doorway, expression taut. "How bad?" Karen met her gaze. "They want naming rights and final editorial review." She tapped a letter. Every newsletter, every press release, could even remove key phrases. Emily exhaled. "That's a lot." They sat, the hum of the refrigerator and distant traffic their only soundtrack. Finally, Karen looked up. "Let's go see them." The sponsor's office smelled like expensive coffee and polished wood. A large executive desk separated Karen and Emily from the sponsor's representative, a poised woman named Claire. "We believe in your vision," Claire began, "but we also represent our stakeholder. Brand visibility matters, and we propose the sponsor name Elder Respect Fund." Emily stiffened, sliding sideways in her chair. Karen didn't flinch. She leaned forward. "Your funding is generous, but we built this initiative to be ours, not branded collateral. We believe in mutual respect between elders and youth, nonprofit and community. I won't trade that for funds." Claire nodded, expression neutral. "Then perhaps we can compromise. Name a scholarship after our foundation, or have logo placement on materials. Review, not veto." Emily whispered, "Is that okay?" Karen looked at the lines in Claire's polished dress. "Better than complete control. Can we review the language right now?" She produced their mission statement, tight, human-focused. No sponsorship tag. She redlined carefully, one paragraph to acknowledge sponsorship, below the fold. No naming rights on program titles. No editorial oversight. A shared press release with mutual quotes, once a year. Claire and her team exchanged glances. After 5 tense minutes, Claire nodded slowly. "We can accept these terms. 1 annual acknowledgement, 1 shared press release, and no board appointment." Karen felt her chest loosen. "This preserves the mission," she whispered to Emily. Claire stood to shake hands. "We stand with this. We want your value, but we want to be seen as a partner, not the boss." Karen returned the handshake firmly. Agreed. Later that afternoon, the team gathered at home to sign the agreement. Emily printed copy. Karen carefully read each line before signing, making sure nothing had been negotiated away. Not her integrity, her autonomy, or her message. When the final initial was penned, Karen closed the binder and leaned back. Emily exhaled, soft relief in her voice. We did it. Karen stood and stretched. We did. She touched the binder, without losing ourselves. That evening, as dusk turned the sky purple, Karen walked outside. A group of neighbors lingered by the mural, chatting softly about upcoming work. Teens were sketching quotes in chalk at the sidewalk's edge. Karen watched it all and felt a renewed sense of possibility. The money would come, but more importantly, the mission would remain theirs, clean, honest, purposeful. She stepped back inside, closing the door softly behind her. The binder lay next to her laptop. She opened it, reviewing one last time. The next morning, the mailbox held another envelope, smaller, crisp, official. Karen hesitated. Inside, a brief note from the sponsor. Congratulations on finalizing the agreement. We'd like to nominate you to lead the Elder Shareholders Committee. We believe your voice should guide the program going forward. Karen read it twice, heart steady and mind clear. The partnership had survived the test. The mission remained pure. But this request, this asked even more. Would she accept this role? She traced the words with her thumb, feeling the boundaries she'd fought so hard to define. Karen folded the note, looked at Emily and asked quietly, "Will taking this chair change everything we've built?" They wanted a face, but I became the board. Karen returned the sponsor's folder and a quiet invitation nestled inside. It wasn't just a committee seat anymore, but the chairperson role. Her eyes lingered on the phrase, "Nominate Karen Holloway as board chair." It landed like sunlight through stained glass, bright, beautiful, impossible to ignore. She exhaled. Her phone buzzed. "Emily, are you ready?" The text read. Karen tapped back. "Let's do." In the sunlit meeting room at the senior center, Karen took her place at the head of a long table. Behind her the logo on the wall gleamed. Elder Respect Initiative. Seated around the polished wood were enthusiastic volunteers, seniors, teens, educators, community leaders. On her right, Emily sat next to the youth advisory panel she'd helped recruit, her eyes bright, her posture confident. When Karen spoke, her voice felt both familiar and new. "Thank you all for trusting me to lead this work," she began. She paused to meet Emily's gaze. "This isn't just a board, it's a family." The room hushed. She continued, stirringly outlining expansion projects, intergenerational workshops, and a new elder mentorship pilot with local high school. Each idea was rooted in respect, each initiative born from years of listening, healing, and hope. Eyes flickered, heads nodded. At the end, applause broke, gentle, collective, sincere. Afterwards, Emily came forward. "You were amazing," she whispered. "Let's build this together." Karen squeezed her hand. Yes. Over the next weeks, the board's first decisions were swift and purposeful. Under Karen's leadership, the Elder Advocacy Program launched a network of volunteers visiting assisted living homes, confidential support lines for seniors facing isolation, and citywide storytelling events. Emily's youth panel pitched social media campaigns and virtual mentorships, messages written by teens, facilitated by seniors. The day the advocacy hotline received its first grateful call, Karen was there. She sat in a small office, phone handset warm in her hand, offering calm words to someone on the other end. Hanging up, she realized she'd been holding her breath, and exhaled deep, full of relief. She looked up to see Emily in the doorway. "How was it?" Emily asked quietly. Karen smiled. "Worth hundreds of speeches." At the headquarters ribbon cutting, Karen stood before a new sign, Elder Respect Initiative, Head Office. Neighbors, donors, board members surrounded her. Cameras flashed. Emily captured it all on her phone, grinning. The mural they painted that summer framed the entrance. Open hands bridging a silhouette of an elder and a child. Karen pressed scissors to ribbon and said, "We built this from our own stories." As she cut, a youthful cheer erupted. She felt the same surge she'd felt at her first salon, only bigger, braver. Later, Emily and Karen sat outside the office. The tree's branches swayed overhead. "It's weird," Emily said slowly. "Being here working on this with you, not as your daughter but as your partner." Karen nodded. "I feel the same." She put an arm around Emily's shoulders. "Your ideas matter. So do you." They sat in comfortable silence. That evening, back home, Karen tucked into bed and stared at the ceiling. The room was quiet, but full of memories. New beginnings, bedtime tea, shared laughter. She thought of her mother's words. "Money isn't a leash, it's a ladder." Of the frozen fund that ignited the fire. Of compromise and courage. Of Emily's daisy petals and Sinatra night. Of her own stubborn search for respect. She realized legacy wasn't about headlines or funding. It was about what you built, and who you built it with. She reached for her phone and typed to Emily, "Proud of us." A moment later, Emily's reply, "Mother's Day tomorrow." Even as the words arrived, Karen felt tears warm her eyes. She hadn't expected it, but it made perfect sense. The next morning, a pale dawn, Karen stepped onto the porch. The garden was wet with dew. Soft bird song drifted. Her breath formed a small cloud in the cool air. She looked up at sky, trees, dewy petals, and let gratitude wash through her. She closed her eyes and whispered, "This is only the beginning." As the sun rose, Karen glanced at her phone. An incoming email titled, "National Board Request." Her heart fluttered with excitement and a hint of dread. Mother's Day dawn broke, gentle, different now. The light eased into the room like a soft breath, cool, pink-edged, and slower than spring had any right to be. Karen rose without her alarm. Her body moved with a sense of memory, not urgency. The house was quiet, except for the whir of the old ceiling fan and a mourning dove outside the window. She stepped into her slippers, pulled a shawl around her shoulders, and made her way out onto the porch. The dew was still thick, clinging to the grass like secrets. She wrapped her arms around herself and looked out past the garden, where Mark had promised to till the soil for tomatoes. Her eyes landed on a small patch of freshly dug earth, under the maple tree, her husband's favorite shade spot. That's where the tree would go. Inside, the coffee brewed strong. The smell curled around her. As the door creaked open, Emily stepped into the kitchen in worn jeans and a faded flannel, a paper folder tucked under one arm. "You're up early," she said. Karen smiled. "Mother's Day waits for no one." Emily poured them each a cup, then set the folder on the counter. "I wrote something." Karen tilted her head. Emily flushed. "It's for today. I wanted to say it in front of everyone, but I needed you to see it first." Karen opened it. The words were simple, honest. A public apology, written not as PR but as truth. Emily acknowledged the things she'd said, the silence she'd offered, and the journey that brought them here. She called it "The Weight of My Words." "I'll read it aloud today," Emily said softly. "I want Mark to hear it. I want Grandma's bench to hear it." Karen's voice caught. "She'd be proud of you." Emily reached for her hand. So would he. By mid-morning, the yard was full of familiar voices and folding chairs. Mark brought the shovel. Sasha arrived with lemon bars and sun hats for the kids. Even Helen came, setting down a dish of deviled eggs and hugging Karen like she'd never let go. The tree arrived in a burlap-wrapped root ball. An oak sapling. Emily stood beside it, fingers brushing the leaves, her expression unreadable. Karen stepped forward and addressed the small crowd. Her voice wasn't rehearsed, but it was sure. "We're planting this tree not just in memory of James, but in honor of what we've learned this year, that strength isn't in standing alone, but in growing together. That legacy doesn't just pass down, it rises up." She looked around the circle, at her children, her neighbors, the elders who had become friends, at Emily. "Thank you all for helping me find the way back." Emily cleared her throat. She stepped forward, unfolding the page she'd brought from the kitchen. She read it all. No stumbles, no edits, just the sound of a daughter returning to herself. By the time she finished, even Sasha had tears slipping silently down her cheek. Karen walked forward, wrapped her arms around her daughter, and held on longer than she'd planned to. Together, they lowered the tree into the hole. Karen pressed earth over roots, her fingers steady. Emily's hand met hers. Mark filled the rest with quiet determination. When they were done, Sasha placed a small wooden plaque into the soil. For James Holloway, love spans lifetimes. The group lingered. Laughter returned. Lemon bars disappeared. Chairs folded. As dusk slipped across the sky, Karen stood at the base of the sapling, now tethered by a support stake and string. Emily joined her. Karen looked up at the canopy. "It's small now," she said, "but it'll grow." Emily answered. Karen nodded. The sun dipped low, brushing gold against the bark. Fireflies sparked at the edges of the yard. The house, the tree, the porch, all felt like parts of something sacred. Karen closed her eyes for a breath, then whispered to herself, "This is just the beginning." Her phone buzzed. A new message. She opened it slowly. "We'd like to invite you to the White House." Her breath caught in her throat. Legacy isn't loud. It's lasting. The late spring sun settled over the community center like a gentle benediction. From the rooftop garden, Karen watched as a group of teenagers painted the final strokes of a mural. Interwoven hands, roots reaching deep, and at the center, a silhouette hinting at her own figure, arms open wide. The image carried her story, pain transformed into purpose, conflict reshaped into connection. Emily and Mark stood beside her, paintbrushes in hand, dusted with color. The three of them shared a silent smile, no words necessary. They had walked through winter together, and this was their spring. Earlier that morning, Karen had joined a weekly check-in at the center. Chairs circled neatly in the sunlit room, as seniors talked about book clubs, yoga classes, and weekend meetups. Emily planned a youth-led storytelling slumber party next month. Mark handled logistics, ensuring the center's van was safe and schedules were set. The pace was busy, but it felt organic, not frantic, not forced. During a break, Karen wandered outside, phone tucked in her pocket. Her gaze shifted from the mural in progress to the memorial tree beneath it. The oak sapling stretched new leaves toward the sky, a symbol of what takes time to grow. She placed a hand on the sturdy trunk, grounding herself in the moment. Inside, Emily joined her. "It's almost done," she said, her voice soft with pride. They added a quote from Roots. I thought you'd like it." Karen studied the mural. "Yes, perfect, simple, true. It's more than just paint. It's story." Emily nodded. "And we're part of it now." Quiet filled the courtyard. Not empty silence, but the hum of life well underway. Children played tag along the path. A volunteer read poems to a circle of seniors, some of whom winked at Karen as she passed. These were the ripples of her choice. That afternoon, the planning committee convened in the office downstairs. Karen sat at the head of the table, listening as members discussed grant applications, mental health workshops, and intergenerational buddy programs that paired high schoolers with elderly mentors. Emily took notes, naturally proactive. Mark chimed in with practical suggestions, budget concerns, transportation routes. Each voice carried respect. The structure was deliberate, but the warmth was intentional. When it finally wound down, Karen lifted her head. "What we do next matters," she said. "Not just today, but 10 years from now. We're planting more than seeds. We're planting mindsets." A volunteer at the back, a retired teacher named Marisol, nodded. "You've given this community permission to care across generations. That's rare." Karen felt a quiet swell. No TV camera, no press releases, just real people, real lives bridging divides. That evening, as dusk draped the center in a pale glow, Karen, Emily and Mark walked home together. They passed the sapling and mural on their way, each touched by it, and Karen paused and reached out, tracing the painted line of her own silhouette on the wall. Emily bumped her shoulder gently. "We did something good, Mom." Karen's eyes shimmered. "We did." Mark reached for her hand. "Better than I could have imagined." They lingered there, 3 generations intertwined, shadows leaning into the cool night. Back home, Karen lit a single candle and poured tea into delicate cups. The light flickered over framed photos. Her mother James, her own younger self, and now Emily at the community center ribbon cutting. Each face smiled, each memory threaded together by choice and chance. She sipped her tea slowly, savoring the flavor of peaceful satisfaction. No triumph, no spectacle, just a quiet ceremony of self-realization. She thought of her mother's words once more. Money isn't a leash, it's a ladder. She had climbed, yes, but she'd also built steps for others to climb alongside her. That legacy felt true. In the soft hum of the evening, Karen realized this wasn't the end. It wouldn't ever really end. Roots grew deep, wings took flight, and she had helped begin both. She glanced at her family. Emily drafting tomorrow's workshop materials on the table. Mark settling bills with calm efficiency. A home humming with purpose. Karen closed her eyes, exhaled, and whispered, "Quiet legacy." A late-night knock startled her. She opened the door to find Marisol, the teacher volunteer, holding a small packet. "It's for you," Marisol said. Inside was a photo book. Images of seniors and teens together. Painting, gardening, laughing. Under each, one-word captions. Listen, respect, grow, heal. The final picture was the mural mid-brush, with Karen's silhouette nearly complete. Marisol handed it to her. "So you don't forget." Tears welled up. But Karen smiled more quietly than the sun. Life had come full circle. As Karen flipped to the first page, she paused at the last photo, a blank frame waiting for her face. She closed the book. Heartful whispered, "Let's fill this next page."